The first time Sydney heard the words, they were not shouted. Get away from her. They were spoken softly, almost lazily, yet the sound sliced through the room with a force that made every breath hitch. The man standing too close to her froze mid-motion, his fingers still hovering near her wrist. He didn't look at Terra's Lukanov when the words were said. He didn't need to. Everyone in the private room already knew who had spoken. Sydney didn't. Not yet. She was too busy trying not to shake. The club was wrong for her. She'd known that the moment she stepped inside, too dark, too loud, too full of men who watched the way predators watched. But she had needed the job. The envelope of cash promised for a single night of hostess work had sounded like a miracle when rent was overdue and the hospital bills were stacked on her kitchen table like accusations. So she smiled when told. She nodded. She followed instructions. And now she stood here, boxed in by velvet couches and glass walls, with a stranger's breath warm against her cheek. Relax, the man murmured, leaning closer. You're here to be charming, yeah? Sydney's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She had learned, over the years, how to disappear inside herself. How to let moments pass without letting them touch too deep. Still, something in her chest tightened, sharp and old, the echo of other rooms, other voices that hadn't listened when she said no. I just need a little space, she said quietly. The man chuckled, clearly amused. That was when the words came. Get away from her. The man recoiled as if struck. Sydney felt it before she understood it, the shift in the air, the sudden heaviness, the way conversation in the room died instantly. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she turned her head. Across the room, half-shadowed, sat a man who hadn't moved. He was large without being bulky, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the low light. His posture was relaxed, one arm draped over the back of the couch, fingers loose, unhurried. His face was calm. Cold. Pale eyes watched from beneath dark lashes with the detached focus of someone used to being obeyed. Terra's Lukanov hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even leaned forward. Yet the man beside Sydney stepped back so fast he nearly tripped. Boss, I didn't, his words tangled as he scrambled away, fear draining the color from his face. Didn't mean anything. Terra's didn't answer. He didn't look at him again. That was somehow worse. Sydney stood rooted to the spot, unsure if she should move or speak or breathe. Her heart hammered as her gaze met Terra's for the first time. The intensity of it stole the air from her lungs. There was no hunger there. No appraisal. Just a steady, unreadable assessment that made her feel exposed in a way she couldn't name. Finally, Terra spoke again. You can go. She blinked. Not you, he said, eyes never leaving hers. The man who had touched her didn't need to be told twice. He fled the room, the door closing behind him with a muted click that echoed far too loudly. Silence followed. Sydney became acutely aware of herself, of the thin straps of her dress, of the unfamiliar weight of the room, of how small she felt standing in front of a man whose presence seemed to bend the world around him. I'm sorry, she said, the word automatic. I didn't mean to cause. Sit, Terra said. It wasn't a command barked in anger. It was worse than that. It was calm. Certain. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She sat on the edge of the couch opposite him, hands folded tightly in her lap. Up close, he was even more imposing. A faint scar cut through his eyebrow, barely visible, but it hinted at violence kept tightly under control. Terra studied her for a long moment. You're not one of ours, he said. Sydney swallowed. I'm just filling in. For the night. His gaze sharpened. Who sent you? She hesitated, instinct warning her to tread carefully. The manager downstairs. He said you needed someone. Terra's exhaled slowly through his nose. Something like irritation flickered across his face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. How old are you? He asked. The question caught her off guard. 24. Another pause. Then, do you know where you are? She shook her head. I know it's a private club. That's all, he asked. Sydney hesitated. Lying felt dangerous. I know it's not exactly legal. A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That's one way to put it. Her hands tightened together. If I shouldn't be here, I can leave. You should have already, Terra said. The words should have felt harsh. Instead, they felt like truth. He leaned back slightly, eyes still fixed on her. Why are you really here, Sydney? Her breath caught. She hadn't told him her name. Her voice wavered, betraying her despite her efforts. I needed the money. Silence stretched between them. Terrace had heard every excuse imaginable. Desperation wore many faces, but it always sounded the same. Still, something about the way she said it, flat, honest, stripped of performance, made him watch her a moment longer. Did he hurt you? He asked. Sydney stiffened. No. It wasn't entirely true, but it was easier than opening doors she'd nailed shut years ago. Terrace accepted the answer with a slight nod. He won't touch you again. The certainty in his voice made her throat tighten. Thank you, she whispered. He waved the words away. This place isn't for you. She glanced around, then back at him. Neither are most places. Something dark flickered in his eyes at that. Recognition, perhaps. Or something more dangerous. Terra stood, the movement smooth and unhurried. Even that made her tense. He crossed the space between them, stopped a careful distance away. Close enough that she could smell clean soap and something sharper beneath it, steel, maybe. You're leaving, he said. Now. What about the job? She asked before she could stop herself. His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, still clenched in her lap, then returned to her face. You'll be paid. Relief washed through her so hard it almost hurt. He reached into his jacket, withdrew an envelope, and placed it on the table between them. She stared at it as if it might vanish. Take it, he said. Sydney did. Her fingers brushed the edge, trembling. When she stood, she hesitated. Why did you help me? Terra's expression didn't change. Because I told him to get away from you. That's not an answer, she said softly. For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed his face. A shadow. A memory he didn't want. It's the only one you're getting. She nodded, understanding that pushing further would be a mistake. As she turned to leave, Terra spoke again. Sydney. She looked back. Don't come back here. She managed a small smile. I wasn't planning to. She left the room, heart pounding, unaware that Terra's remained standing long after the door closed, staring at the space she had occupied. Something had shifted. And he didn't like it at all. Sydney thought about Terra's Lukanov far more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was only because he had been the unexpected variable in a night she wanted to forget. A sudden interruption. A stranger with cold eyes and a voice that had cut through fear like a blade. Anyone would remember that. But days passed. Then a week. And still, sometimes, when she closed her eyes at night, she heard his voice again. Calm. Controlled. Get away from her. She hated that it had felt like safety. Her life didn't allow space for fantasies like that. Safety had always been temporary, borrowed, conditional. It was something you created yourself or paid for later. Sydney went back to her routines. Early mornings. The bus ride that smelled faintly of oil and old rain. Her job at the small accounting office where no one asked personal questions as long as the numbers balanced. Evenings spent cooking simple meals and sorting mail she didn't want to open. The envelope from that night remained hidden in the back of her closet. She hadn't touched the money. Not because she didn't need it, God, she did, but because it felt heavy in a way cash never had before. Like accepting it had tied her to something unseen. To him. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the receptionist called her name with a hesitant tone. Sydney? There's someone here to see you. Her stomach dropped. I don't have any appointments, Sydney said, already standing. I know, but he insists. He says it's important. Sydney followed her toward the lobby, each step slow, her pulse ticking louder with every second. He stood near the window, tall and unmistakable. Terra's Lukanov didn't belong in places like this. The fluorescent lights, the cheap carpet, the faint hum of printers, it all felt smaller with him inside it. He wore a dark coat, tailored, severe. His expression was unreadable, as always. Every head in the lobby turned subtly toward him, curiosity sharpening into instinctive caution. Sydney stopped a few feet away. Her first emotion wasn't fear. It was anger. You said not to come back, she said quietly. Terra's turned his head, eyes finding hers instantly. You didn't. That's not the point. A flicker of something, approval, maybe, crossed his face. We need to talk. Her jaw tightened. About what? Not here. She glanced around. Too many ears. Too many questions waiting to be asked. I'm working, she said. I know, he replied. I spoke to your supervisor. Her heart skipped. You what? You're free for the rest of the day, Terra said. Paid. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. You can't just. I already did. She stared at him, fury and unease tangling in her chest. She didn't like this. Didn't like how easily he moved pieces around her life. But she also knew something else. Men like him didn't show up without reason. Fine, she said at last. 5 minutes. Terra's inclined his head. My car is outside. Of course it was. The ride was silent at first. The city slid past the windows, familiar streets bending toward places Sydney rarely went. The car was expensive without being flashy, dark leather and quiet power. Terra sat across from her, hands resting loosely on his knees. She broke first. Why are you here? He studied her face as if committing it to memory. Because you shouldn't have been there that night. Her breath caught. You already told me that. You didn't listen. I left, she snapped. I didn't go back. You didn't need to, Terra said. They shouldn't have sent you in the first place. They, she repeated. He didn't answer immediately. The man who hired you violated an agreement. Sydney felt a chill. An agreement with who? With me. The implications settled heavily. I don't want anything to do with that world, she said. Terra's nodded. That's why I'm here. The car slowed, pulling to a stop in front of a quiet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a closed florist. It was ordinary. Intentionally so. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and baked bread. Soft music played. A safe place. Almost. They sat at a corner table. Terra spoke first. The club you worked at is under my protection. Sydney's fingers tightened around her cup. Protection from what? From consequences, he said calmly. In exchange for following rules. And I was, against the rules. Yes. She laughed once, bitter. Because I'm not disposable enough? His gaze sharpened. Because you weren't informed. Sydney leaned back, folding her arms. So what now? You apologize and disappear again? No. The word landed solidly. I'm shutting that operation down, Terra said. At least temporarily. Her eyes widened. Because of me? Because of what happened to you. The distinction mattered more than he knew. She looked away, staring out the window. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, he replied. Like what? She challenged. That you lie badly when you're scared, he said. That you don't ask for help even when you need it. That you accepted money you haven't spent. Her head snapped back toward him. How would you? You're not subtle, Terra said, not unkindly. Silence fell. Sydney took a breath. Why does this matter to you? He considered the question longer this time. Because I don't like loose ends. She shook her head. That's not it. No, he admitted. It's not. The truth hovered between them, unspoken and dangerous. Terra's leaned back. Someone like you doesn't walk into a place like that unless they're cornered. Her throat tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know desperation, he said softly. The words struck deeper than she wanted them to. You don't get to analyze me, she snapped. And you don't get to pretend you're fine, he replied. They stared at each other, tension coiling tight. Finally, Sydney stood. This was a mistake. Terra's rose with her. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. She hesitated. How? I'll find you safer work, he said. Something you can choose. Her laugh was hollow. You don't get to play savior. I'm not, Terra said. I'm correcting an error. She met his gaze. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. But you are under my protection now. The word echoed ominously. I didn't ask for that. You didn't ask for a lot of things, he replied. They left the cafe separately. Sydney walked home with her nerves stretched thin, his presence lingering like a shadow at her back. She told herself she wouldn't see him again. She was wrong. Over the next weeks, Terra's became a constant she couldn't ignore. A call informing her of a new job offer, better hours, better pay. A repairman arriving to fix her broken heater, fully paid. A quiet awareness of being watched without feeling threatened. It unsettled her. It also made her feel seen. She confronted him one evening when she caught sight of his car across the street from her apartment. You can't keep doing this, she said, marching up to him. Terra stepped out, unbothered. Doing what? Inserting yourself into my life. I'm keeping you safe. I don't need you, she said fiercely. His gaze softened in a way that scared her more than anger ever could. Everyone needs someone. The words hung heavy. Sydney looked away. You don't even know me. Then let me, Terra said. Her breath caught. That was how it began, not with passion or promises, but with resistance and proximity. With arguments that ended in silence too thick to ignore. With glances that lingered too long. Terrace found himself watching her laugh one evening, surprised by the sound. It did something to his chest he didn't like. Sydney found herself noticing how careful he was around her, how his control wasn't just power but restraint. The attraction crept in slowly. Reluctantly. Dangerously. And beneath it all, the world Terra's ruled began to close in, impatient with his distraction, with the woman who had become far more than a loose end. Neither of them realized yet that what was building between them would demand a price. But the tension was already there. Waiting. The first crack appeared on a night that felt too quiet. Sydney sensed it before anything happened, the way the air pressed heavier against her skin, the way the city outside her apartment seemed to hold its breath. Terrace hadn't called that day. He hadn't sent one of his brief, infuriatingly efficient messages checking in. The absence gnawed at her far more than his presence ever had. She told herself that was dangerous. She was folding laundry when the knock came. 3 sharp taps. Her body went rigid. Sydney had learned the rhythm of the world well enough to know when something was wrong. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't a delivery. This was interruption with intent. She approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the other side. Mid-30s. Well-dressed. Too well-dressed for the building. His expression was polite in the way predators often were. Her heart began to race. She didn't open the door. Miss Sydney, the man called, voice smooth. I just want to talk. She swallowed. I don't know you. No, he agreed easily. But I know you. Her hand trembled where it rested against the doorframe. You should leave. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. You're under the impression you're untouchable now. The words sent ice through her veins. I don't know what you're talking about. We represent interests that are inconvenienced by Terra's Lukanov's recent decisions, the man continued. And you are at the center of that inconvenience. Her chest tightened painfully. I haven't done anything, she whispered. Exactly, he said. And that's the problem. Sydney backed away from the door, every instinct screaming. Tell Terra's, the man said, his tone shifting, hardening just enough, that protection has a cost. She heard his footsteps retreating, unhurried. When the hallway fell silent, Sydney sank to the floor, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She called Terra's. It rang once. Twice. Then connected. Where are you? She demanded the moment he answered. A beat of silence. Too long. Are you safe? Terra's asked. The question confirmed everything. No, she said, voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. Someone was just here. They knew my name. The line went quiet, then Terra spoke, his voice low, lethal in its calm. I'm coming. He arrived 20 minutes later. Sydney had barely moved. She was still sitting on the couch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, when she heard the familiar knock, controlled, certain. She opened the door and he was there. Terra's took one look at her face and something inside him fractured. He stepped in, shutting the door behind him, his gaze scanning the apartment automatically, assessing exits, corners, threats. When he was satisfied, his attention snapped back to her. Did they touch you? He asked. She shook her head. They warned me. His jaw tightened, muscle jumping. What did they say? She repeated the words, watching his expression darken with every sentence. This is my fault, Terra said finally. No, Sydney snapped. This is exactly what I didn't want. He turned toward her sharply. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want to be part of this, she shouted. I didn't ask for protection. I didn't ask for enemies I've never even met. Terra's closed the distance between them in 2 strides, stopping himself just short of touching her. You were already part of it, he said quietly. The moment you walked into that club. That's not fair, she whispered. No, he agreed. It isn't. The weight of the truth pressed down on them both. Sydney laughed weakly. So what now? You move me? Hide me? Turn my life upside down even more? Yes, Terra said without hesitation. Her eyes flashed. You don't get to decide that. I do if it keeps you alive. I don't want to live like this, she said, tears burning her eyes. Always looking over my shoulder. Always wondering who's watching. Terra's voice softened. Neither do I. She stared at him. Then why do you? The question cut deeper than any accusation. Terra's turned away, running a hand through his hair. Because there was no other option. Wasn't there? She pressed. Or did you just stop looking? Silence fell heavy between them. You should have left me alone, Sydney said. Terra's faced her again, eyes dark. I tried. No, you didn't, she replied. You decided for me. Just like everyone else always has. The words hit him like a blow. You think I don't know what control does, she continued, voice breaking. You think I don't recognize it when I see it? His chest tightened painfully. I never meant to. I know, she interrupted. That's what makes it worse. She wiped at her eyes angrily. I trusted you. The admission hung in the air, fragile and devastating. Terra's took a step back, as if giving her space hurt him physically. Then listen to me now. You're not safe here. Neither are you, she shot back. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, Sydney saw something she hadn't before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. You don't tell me everything, she said softly. No, Terra admitted. Why? Because if you knew, he said, voice tight, you wouldn't look at me the same way. Her heart pounded. Try me. Terra closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, resolve hardening. They're not just threatening, he said. They're challenging me. Sydney's breath caught. There are people in my world who believe weakness should be exposed, he continued. And caring about you is seen as weakness. The words sank in slowly, horrifically. You're saying I'm a target, she whispered. I'm saying you're leverage. Her stomach twisted. Then let me go. The plea came from somewhere deep, raw. Cut me loose. They won't have a reason anymore. Terra stared at her, anguish flickering across his face. It doesn't work that way. Why not? She demanded. Because you don't want it to? Because once they know, he said, voice breaking just slightly, they don't forget. Tears slipped down her cheeks despite her efforts. You should have told me. I wanted to protect you, he said. And instead you trapped me. The truth of it rang loud and cruel. A phone vibrated in Terra's pocket. He didn't look away from her as he answered. Yes, he said. His expression hardened further. When? A pause. I'll handle it. He ended the call. What was that? Sydney asked. They made a move, Terra said. One of my men. He's alive, but the message is clear. She felt dizzy. Because of me. Because of me, he corrected. You're just convenient. The distinction didn't make her feel better. You need to leave, Terra said. Her head snapped up. What? Tonight, he continued. I'll arrange somewhere secure. Off the grid. Her voice shook. You're not coming with me. No. The word felt like a knife. Why? She demanded. Because if I disappear, Terra said, they'll hunt harder. She stepped closer, defiant even through her fear. You can't just decide to push me away now. I can if it keeps you breathing. She reached for him without thinking, fingers curling into the fabric of his coat. You don't get to choose sacrifice for both of us. His breath hitched at the contact. This is exactly why, he said hoarsely. Why I should never have let this happen. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then why did you? Terra's looked at her then, not as a boss, not as a protector, but as a man standing on the edge of something irreversible. Because you saw me, he said. And I didn't want to be invisible anymore. The confession shattered what little distance remained between them. Sydney pressed her forehead against his chest, shaking. I'm scared. Terra's wrapped his arms around her without thinking, holding her tightly, as if anchoring himself as much as her. I know, he murmured. They stayed like that for a long moment, the world narrowing to breath and heartbeat and the terrible knowledge that this was already breaking them. When Terra's finally pulled back, his expression was resolute, carved from pain. You'll leave tonight, he said. No arguments. Sydney wiped her face, nodding numbly. This was the point of no return. Neither of them said the words. They didn't need to. The city felt different after goodbye. Sydney noticed it immediately, the way the streets seemed louder, sharper, as if every sound carried intention. She sat in the back seat of the car Terra had arranged, hands folded tightly in her lap, staring out the window as familiar landmarks slipped away. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything about this departure had been decided without her consent, and yet she had agreed because somewhere deep inside, she understood the truth Terra hadn't said aloud. This was love shaped like fear. The safe house was quiet. Too quiet. It sat beyond the edge of the city, surrounded by trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. Inside, everything was clean, sparse, temporary. A place meant for waiting, not living. Sydney spent the first night awake. She lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Terra's last look over and over again. The way his jaw had tightened when he'd turned away. The way his hands had lingered at her shoulders for just a second too long, as if memorizing the shape of her. He hadn't kissed her. That hurt more than if he had. Days passed slowly. Terra's checked in through short, coded messages delivered by people who never stayed long enough to ask questions. He was alive. Busy. Careful. The words were efficient, stripped of emotion, and Sydney hated them for it. She wanted anger. She wanted reassurance. She wanted him. Instead, she got silence between updates and too much time to think. She began to understand something then. Terra's hadn't just protected her from his world. He had protected his world from her. Because loving her had made him reckless. And recklessness, in his life, was fatal. The realization didn't bring comfort. It brought resolve. On the 7th day, the message didn't come. Sydney waited an hour. Then 2. Her chest tightened with every passing minute, instinct screaming louder than logic. She paced the small living room, hands shaking, mind racing through worst-case scenarios she tried not to imagine. When the knock finally came, it wasn't the careful rhythm she'd grown used to. It was urgent. She opened the door to find a woman she didn't recognize, eyes sharp, posture tense. "You need to come with me," the woman said. "What happened?" Sydney demanded. "Terra's Lukanov is ending this tonight." The words hit like a blow. Ending what? Sydney asked, though she already knew. "The challenge," the woman said. "The threats. All of it." Fear surged through her. "Is he hurt?" "Not yet," came the reply. "But he will be if this goes wrong." Sydney didn't hesitate. "Take me to him." The woman frowned. "That's not." "He didn't send you here to stop me," Sydney said quietly. "He sent you because he knows I won't stay away." The truth settled between them. Minutes later, the car was speeding back toward the city. The building Terra's chose was old. Abandoned by everyone except those who understood its value. The meeting was meant to be quiet, decisive. A demonstration of power without spectacle. Sydney slipped inside through a side entrance, heart hammering, guided by the woman who finally relented. Voices echoed faintly from somewhere deep inside. She recognized Terra's voice instantly. Calm. Cold. Controlled. He stood at the center of the room, surrounded by men who watched him carefully, measuring every movement. He looked exactly as he always did, untouchable, unyielding. Until he saw her. For the first time since she'd known him, Terra's froze. "Sydney," he said, the single word stripped bare of control. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she replied, stepping forward. "But neither should you be doing this alone." The room tensed. Eyes darted between them, curiosity sharpening into calculation. "This is what they wanted," one of the men sneered. "Proof." Terra's moved instantly, positioning himself between Sydney and the others without thinking. "She leaves. Now." Sydney placed a hand on his arm. The contact grounded him, and undid him. "Look at me," she said softly. Against every instinct, he did. "I'm not leverage," she continued. "I'm not weakness." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand." "I do," she interrupted gently. "You think loving someone makes you vulnerable. I think it shows them exactly how far you're willing to go." The room held its breath. Sydney turned her gaze to the others. "You wanted proof he could be controlled. You wanted to see him break." She looked back at Terra's, eyes steady. "But this is where he stands. He didn't hide me. He didn't deny me. He protected me, even when it cost him." Silence stretched. Then one man laughed, low and humorless. You think this ends because of a speech? No, Sydney said. It ends because you miscalculated. Terrace felt it then, the shift. Not fear. Respect. The kind earned only through restraint. This is over, Terrace said, voice ringing with finality. There will be no more messages. No more tests. And if we refuse, someone challenged. Terrace didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. You already tried, he said. And you failed. One by one, they backed down. Not because of threat, but because the outcome was suddenly clear. When the last of them left, the room felt hollow. Terrace turned to Sydney, every wall stripped away. What did you do? He asked quietly. I stopped running, she replied. He exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead to hers. I was trying to save you. I know, she whispered. But you don't have to lose yourself to do it. They left together. Not because everything was safe. But because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, things changed, slowly, deliberately. Terrace didn't abandon his world, but he reshaped it. Boundaries tightened. Lines were redrawn. His power became quieter, more precise. Sydney moved back into her apartment, then into a new one. One with sunlight. One that felt like choice. They didn't rush. They learned each other in fragments. Shared meals. Long conversations that stretched into silence. Moments where Terra struggled to let go of control, and moments where Sydney reminded him he didn't have to carry everything alone. The love that grew between them wasn't dramatic. It was steady. Earned. One evening, months later, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. I used to think fear kept me alive, Terra said. Sydney leaned into his side. And now? And now I know it was distance, he replied. You changed that. She smiled softly. So did you. Below them, the city breathed on, dangerous, beautiful, alive. This time, neither of them looked away. Hey loves. He was a man feared by everyone, except the woman who saw the man behind the silence. And she was never fragile, she was just tired of surviving alone. This story is about what happens when control meets trust, and both are forced to change. Thanks for staying with me until the end. I'll see you soon in another story. Bye.